So the co-chairs are Noreen and Rhonda. We haven't really decided who wants to, but maybe one, Noreen, if you start and then we can,
Okay. I'd like to call the meeting to order and read the accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Microphones or telephones will be used by all speakers. Large print materials are available upon advance request. If you would like either of these accommodations, please contact Mary Waldron at 508-583-1833. The notice of non-discrimination rights and protections to beneficiaries with regard to the federal Title VI/non-discrimination protections and the state non-discrimination protections is posted in this meeting room and is available on the Colony Planning Council website. Please contact Mary Waldron at 508-583-1833 for more information. And thank you all for joining us today. So I just want to call the meeting to order and the roll call. And do we want to take the roll call now, Mary?
I will, yes, please.
Okay.
So Madam Co-Chair, Noreen O'Toole.
Yes.
Madam
Present.
Co-Chair, Rhonda Nyman.
Finally, I'm present. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, thank you, Rhonda. Valerie Massart.
Present.
And Yolanda Spinola.
Present.
And for staff, it's Megan Fournier and Paulo Mano. In addition to myself, and Charlie Kilmer extends his apologies, but he's on his way heading back home. So, but this is being recorded. So, I think, Madam Chair, if I think we just want to go into the purpose of the committee and meeting requirements.
Okay.
So in this case, we do have two co-chairs. I think this is where the discussion, open discussion about what expectations in my email that I had forwarded said I don't expect to really be having these very frequent. But just as I said that, there's been lots of different things that have come through from staff as well as from outside sources. So, you know, I think that these meetings to kind of flush through, I mean, offline before we started recording, we talked about the housing bill that's before the legislature and whether we as an organization want to weigh in. Or there are things like the highest priorities are, you know, the retirement legislation, right? That is pending, and how do we weigh in and how do we advocate for ourselves? But there's also the district local technical assistance program that we are so dependent upon in terms of doing our work, particularly in the planning area, that every year we have to advocate for that for the legislature. So it becomes a legislative, right? So whether it is an actual act of legislature or whether it's part of the budget, that's where I feel that if it's either one of those, budgetary or whether it's legislatively, this committee should have at least a viewing of it, and we should be able, I believe that we should be having documents. Megan, it's in the Google Drive.
Correct.
Okay. And so there will be a legislative, I believe we're having a legislative folder in the Google Drive that we will continue to keep different pieces of legislation just so it can be reviewed, and we can easily just send the link for your review. So right. That's the intention from, I know when it was established over a year ago in the ordinance, not the ordinance, in the bylaw committee discussions, but that there be a fruitful discussion between staff and council members before taking it to the full council.
You know, I think that as far as some of the items you just listed, I think for OCPC, I think the familiarity with the Delta program that most of us here know about, I think that's something that we should always be on top of, because that's something that your professional staff members provide lots of those services to all the towns. So, you know, I would see something like that as a top priority. That, you know, we're on top of that, and, you know, when that comes about and when the funding is about to happen, you know, we should be very active during that time, whether it be support letters or, you know, providing them with all the projects that have been completed. I think that program is very, very important to the council itself, the OCPC at large. And I know that that housing bill, I know that your planning department has done a lot with that MBTA multifamily housing. And I think that there's been a lot of technical assistance, and I know you folks have received some of it, but I know all the other towns are, because the state is making those funds very available, and the application process is rather simple, you know, and I think people are trying to get on board on that. But what I see as issues as a planner myself is I see the big issue is infrastructure, you know, for these towns. You know, some of our towns, they're just so spread out. And I think that if they want to be successful, you know, Mass Works is going to have to start working with these towns. If they want housing, then these towns cannot afford to provide housing. They just do not have the infrastructure to do that. So I think that's something we probably should keep an eye on. I think the state is providing, as the RPAs are, lots of technical assistance in that, which is great.
You know,
And
I may suggest to both you and Co-Chair Nyman is that maybe everybody gets a chance of the council members to weigh in your topics, and as we'll write them down and then prepare some
exactly.
information.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I want to kind of turn it over to Rhonda, because I'm sure you have other ideas, like there's the retirement legislation. There's so much going on. And I also wanted to ask you, Mary, about MAPA, how that can help us.
Great.
Okay. I mean, you don't have to answer that now, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Great. Thank you.
All right. You're on, Rhonda.
Oh, thank you, Noreen. Certainly, I defer to you. You've been on this committee a little bit longer than I have, so thank you for that. I would just like to weigh in about the housing bill, the MBTA housing, the zoning. I noticed that in Milton, they were unsuccessful. They just took that vote, and you know, I know Hanover was you know, used the technological services that you know, OCPC provided for us. So that was a real struggle for municipalities, I think. So thank you for that. I think that's important. And I like what you said, Mary, about reaching out to the rest of the delegates, you know, kind of get a sense on whether, you know, if they have a feel, if they're in favor of it. I guess, is that what you're saying? Maybe get a read on what, or just refer to them about, you know, maybe we can get some input. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that kind of is what I'm saying. I think, you know, we all assume that everybody's reading, you know, current events, but I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think that, you know, because of our council members, some are select board members and some are not, some of them are citizen. But I think that our job as staff is to give that information so you know. And again, it's almost like that whole discussion we had with retirement. There's a level of comfort I have in speaking for the council, but when it does become policy, that's really where I think I need to be able to do the pros and cons, you know, do an analysis and then set it to the council for the council members to vote. But this is a committee that it needs to be vetted through.
So for me, I mean, I look at a lot of legislation, you know, legislation, part of my job at the sheriff's office. That's what I look at, public safety legislation. I guess for me, it would be helpful, or do you give us some sort of direction? Like you just listed off a few things like the Delta program. I'm not familiar with that. Noreen, you are. Yes. You know, the retirement legislation, because I know we talked about that a couple of meetings ago, our last meeting. So things like that. But does somebody be helpful in giving me some sort of direction about what's important? So, you know, I guess that would be helpful.
We can. So I think this is where I can probably interject a little bit on the Mass Association of Regional Planning Agencies. So the Metropolitan Area Planning Council is basically our legislative liaison. There's some great staff that follow legislation all the time. That's all their job is.
Okay.
So not all regional planning agencies have a legislative liaison. We don't. But I hear a lot from like Senator Brady, or I'll hear from some of the other legislators when there's some bills that are coming up. But back to the Mass Association of Regional Planning Agencies, we do get communication from them to give us an alert, like when there's either legislation or there is funding that needs to become available. Usually it's about a few days notice, but as soon as we get that notice, I think the policy should be that I automatically inform this committee.
Okay.
with the president of the council to let you know that this is coming. You know, the goal for me would be to inform you as much as what's out there, so it's not reacting, as opposed to, listen, we talked about this. This is where this committee voted and it went to the council. I feel very comfortable with going to, you know, to testify before a bill because the council supported it, or asking council members to come with me to testify for a bill if that's what's required.
Okay.
So the comfort level would be, you know, for this meeting, I didn't do it, but I think what I would like to, I think, want to hear from all of you in terms of what your priorities, this committee's priorities are. Take those. I'll add, because we're right in the meantime, Megan's doing a bit of a poll of asking members what they'd like to see for council meetings, whether it's someone to come speak. I'd like to almost use some of those parts of that council meeting for a legislative update. You know, here are the bills, this is what's coming up, and those are the things on a monthly basis.
Mary, I think that, you know, segues into, I think you had mentioned about having a legislative either brunch or breakfast or meeting of something. Yes. You know, once we have our bills in order, you know, then we could say, hey, let's invite them, hand them a packet, let's talk about it. I guess maybe is that kind of what you're looking for, right?
It's very much so. The last time that we had all the legislators on, when you know, our now Ambassador Claire Cronin was chair of the judiciary, and she came, it was during COVID, but came online, and we pretty much had all the legislators there in supporting her, but came and she spoke about, you know, a little bit more globally about things. But that was like really the last time we really did we hosted something. You know, I'm usually attending. I know a couple of the members will come also to a legislative, whether it's the Plymouth Chamber or the Metro South Chamber. But that's going there because not always the chamber and our priorities are the same. So I think ultimately is in fact to do a breakfast or some kind of legislative gathering. So we have all of our council members led by all of you with what the charge may be. Okay.
And we have a few other members as well on our committee, right? It was Valerie and...
Yep, she's on. Yep, Val and Yolanda. And Yolanda.
Oh, and Yolanda. Okay, yep. Great. Thanks. All righty, great. I think I have the gist of a few things here.
No, that's okay. And I thought maybe if Valerie and Yolanda maybe want to unmute yourself and maybe talk about some of your priorities.
Yeah, Valerie, I don't know if you want to go first. But I guess for me, I would say, like, I guess a clarification on there's the MBTA Communities Act, communities that impacts housing, but then there's also the governor's housing bond bill piece of legislation. So I don't know if we want to, I guess just a clarification on if we're looking at that one or just the MBTA one.
I think it's both.
Okay, both of them. Yeah, I feel like both of them have a huge impact on planning and housing going forward, and the work that OCPC does. So those are probably ones that we want to get clarification on how we as a committee are going to support it, or what type of clarification that we want to provide to the rest of the council.
Great, thank you, Loda.
Yeah, I think you picked my hot potatoes as well. Those are pretty key to all the planning that we're doing in that South Shore. The infrastructure, like you mentioned, Noreen, and earlier in the conversation, is the big question, and not being addressed is the schools, of course, and the impact to the schools of having all this new housing. I think that that's being maybe addressed elsewhere or maybe not, but I think that politically you can't really talk about it, but I don't think we can ignore it either. So
I think that's the whole purpose for this committee too. I think, Val, is that it's right, we're recording it, but at the same time we need to put them on a table, and having your input as a delegate, all of yours, I think really is going to be helpful for guidance, as well as, you know, it's serving as a rudder for which way we're going to go. again, it's again focusing where we're going to put our attention to. There was a couple other items, and I had asked Charlie before he left for the day, but to put together a listing of items that he thought were important matters. And, he had, an act relative to roadway safety. In fact, Megan, I might just have you let me share my screen just so I can share Charlie's notes. And my apologies for not sending it. He just sent it to her.
And Mary too, just one other note, Yolanda, when he was speaking, that the municipal bill, would that be something that, members would like to hear about? Because I know there's a lot from municipalities. The governor came out with one that there's some, new ways and meals tax. I mean, is that something that you think they would want to be interested in?
It most certainly is. It's one of the reasons why Paul Umano's on as well, because I think it was a couple of these items Paul's been following for us as well. And, he said a number of regional federal funding, but by hearing about those, there's other discussions. So again, we're writing all of these down and capturing them. And I think today maybe a good purpose would be just to do some brainstorming. Let me.
What I was thinking too, Barry, to interrupt for a minute, is the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP program.
Yeah.
Now, people hear that, they kind of know TIP must have to do with the roadways. But I think council members need to know exactly what that is, what that entails, so that it needs to be brought back to towns, because some of the boards of selectmen, they may have a delegate, but they may not have someone that's representing. They may have a highway surveyor, they may have a DPW director. They may not realize that there are funds available, okay? And this is the process in which, you could go forward with the funds, which entails going to your town meeting, having so much of the design. So I know that it's complicated, but I know that years ago, when I went to Stoughton and they didn't have any projects at that time, I had your staff come to the Board of Selectmen, and it was so successful.
Right.
Explain to the board, this is what's available, and this is part of the transportation bond bill, and you need to apply for it. And then I look at Stoughton now with all the projects they have on the tip. So I think other towns need to know about that in case they're not aware of that, because that's just another financial arm that, can really help towns with their roadway systems and their infrastructure.
So I totally agree. Charlie and I have had some conversations. We've actually had maybe about 3 to 4 separate meetings with towns, like the town of Bridgewater recently. Right. We met with them and discussed, the process that they weren't aware of. And then there's some communities that just, once you get in that groove and the ability and be on the tip in terms of programming. So, yes, we'll put that down. That might be I'm going to recommend that we do a webinar on that, so it's captured. Right. Charlie has a nice book about the transportation improvement program.
There's a lot to it.
So anyway, so we'll put the tip down. But also here is Charlie's suggestions. The District Local Technical Assistance Program. There is also the DLTA Plus, and that's new. This is a second year. But those funds are always allocated, and those funds need to be used for securing getting federal funds. But again, those funds are pretty critical for the work that we're doing. As I said, Charlie has the House 3470. That's relative to road safety. And it defines crosswalks and marked crossings. As we know, those are the sidewalks, and some of those things are always never really the ones that really get funded, but they're important. So these marked crossings are really important for pedestrian safety. The next is the act promote safe bicycle yielding. Since we are focused on pedestrian and cycling, this is important in terms of, there's some recent legislation that you have to have, I should know, call it 3 feet, the distance between a cyclist and a car. But this is an additional legislation that could be helpful to, again, this is I'm just being brought, I'm not necessarily asking for today, because I just came in and I want to share it with you, and we'll put it in the Google Drive. As we talked about the MBTA communities and what it does, should this be changed, modified based on experience since implementation, right? So there's a number of our communities that have implemented, and some have embraced it, and some have found it to be an extraordinarily difficult, as I'm looking at Val, because, right, I know with Kingston and with Plymouth, and I mean, they're making it work, but to get to the point of, doing what they're doing already, and it's at some point becomes very challenging, right? So that's the MBTA, the multi-family zoning, the MBTA communities. And then it's the fare-free buses. There's some legislation that would be helpful. Access to jobs, access to education is really important. We have a relationship with Transit Matters, and their equity and having transportation be available, affordable, for all. I think if you were going to take a medium home income person within our region, let's call it Brockton for now, they can't afford a monthly pass at, I don't know what it is, $350 a month. That's really expensive when you're trying to balance everything. So the fare-free buses is a legislation. We'll put this into the coffers about, so whether we take a stance and how active do we take a stance. And then it's, this is the one relative to regional planning agencies. This has to do with the retirement membership that we talked about, and that we talked about at the last council meeting. So we'll, I'm going to stop sharing that. We'll get all of those. You don't have to write them down. We'll put them in a nice organized manner, and do a deeper dive. I do know when I worked in the legislature myself in the committee staff puts together an analysis, the pros and the cons. They also put together an impact, financial impact. So if we gather that information, it will help then provide background for you as a legislative committee on those matters. So I think, Megan, we were talking about creating a legislative parking lot for legislative matters that will take up with this committee. I think that's kind of what we're looking for today. I think we're probably going to need, now that we're kind of got yours, we'll get council members' opinions and interest. We'll put them in, we'll do the legislative background on them and tee them up to all of you, so then we can have this committee vet them.
So Mary, do you think each one of the members on the legislative committee could take certain bills or certain legislation? Like maybe I take 3 or 4 bills, or do we work on it as a whole, or just like, Noreen takes? I mean, do you have any suggestions that way? Or
so that was wonderful.
Yep.
And I would never say no to any committee members who would like to do some research. I would say that the staff, try to make your jobs not so it's a heavy lift.
okay.
But if your interest is there,
Yeah.
I will embrace that 1000%.
Wonder, I think that's a great idea. I agree. Great
Val?
idea.
Maybe we could split it up and get the
Right.
information, reach out to folks instead of, but I didn't know if you had staff that could do that. I'm just so used to doing these things on my own with no help. So, but if other members would like to research it themselves, I don't know, we can talk about it, I guess, Noreen, if you think that's great,
Val is unmuted, and so is Yolanda, so maybe they weigh in too.
Yeah, I'm open to helping do some research. I guess I haven't gone through the process of reaching out to folks in the legislature and their staff on this, but I'm definitely interested in learning.
Great. Terrific.
And I'd be willing to help as a former legislator. I could help direct you to, the certain committees that you need to reach out and their staff. It's, I'm sure you can handle it. It's just knowing the point person to get in touch with,
I appreciate that, Rhonda. Thank you.
Okay.
And Val, anything?
I agree. I think it's something that I'd like to help out with. definitely have a limited amount of time, but if there are, you know, if give me one or two to really focus on and not, I don't think I could do several. I'll just be.
That would be helpful.
I'm kind of with you too, Val. Yeah.
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 So I think the way we work it, well, let us put together what we heard today in terms of items. There's some other ones that we didn't bring up, some of the ones that Charlie had. And then I would recommend if you have an interest in one or two, then you as a member take that on. And Yolanda, so I used to be a staff member with the legislator, and of course with Rhonda being a former legislator as well. It is important to start to know some of the committee members and the staff, and that does open up a lot of doors and makes it life a lot easier. So be more than happy, even if I reach out or if any of us reach out, maybe just to include Yolanda on that, so we'll know like the processes of, I mean, it's public information, right? And I forget, Rhonda, the number of the statistics, like the number of bills that get filed and the ones that actually become law is so minute, such a small number. And I know that there's often where they combined legislation together, so because they sound similar. So I think for us is identifying the priorities and then going from there. And Paul, just because I know I'm going to call on you for a little bit, because you also see a lot of the legislation that come through as well, just from your past and your eagle eye in terms of what you see. I mean, is there anything else that you see that could be helpful to us? I know you're muted.
I think at least at the federal level, the congressionally directed spending has been huge in recent years. And I know Brockton's taken advantage of a couple of opportunities through two subcommittees, one being the Housing and Urban Development and the other through the EPA. So that's how they got the $3 million earmark to do the Cosgrove Pool and another $2 million earmark for addressing the biosolids issue, which is basically a fancy way to say to deal with the byproduct of wastes in the city. It's not, I'll leave to your imagination what that means. So that's
yeah,
one sort of tool.
So we'll add those, I think, I think, again, it kind of crosses over some of it's by funding itself, but it has legislative elements to it. And then it's actually the legislation as well. So Megan, maybe if we could just show, and I think the idea is taking some complicated legislation and do it do it in graphic that makes it easier for us to capture. So, right. And this was in your packet, I believe, right, Megan? Yeah.
I don't know if we ended up attaching this because we did final edits to it, but it is in the share drive now. I mean, the Google Drive.
So we'll add this to them, but the idea again, right? It's the legislation affecting us, financially affecting us, but it's something that, we will need all our delegates and alternates to be weighing in on, to make sure that any legislation does not affect us in a negative manner. But this was done with taking that complicated conversation we had and putting it into a graphic where, in terms of, who does it affect and what does it mean and how long it's been there and what's the memberships and, the 1% reflects to, I need it a little bit bigger than that, Megan, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, for negotiation, right? This is what you voted on, was giving me, right, the authority to up to that 1%, if we're going to be getting into negotiating, which is not this Friday, but a week from Friday, I'm meeting up with the other regional planning agencies. And then a very nice timeline, when this all started, the working group and when that disbanded and officially meeting. And it really, really is helpful. Gives a history from, right? We all talked about how many council members were around when this all started. And there's a lot of new members that came on that are saying like, what are we talking about? Like, what does this all mean? And so this is going to be helpful to give that timeline. And then you know, again, the dueling bills, thank you. This is right here is the dueling bills, the ones that we filed, the ones that the treasurer's office filed. You know, Rhonda, there's been some times that I think like maybe perhaps just a phone call to Deb Goldberg and said, hey, right? I mean, I've thought about that, doing that myself since I know her. And I'm like, I could probably do that and just say, listen, you know, we know like this is where our dilemma is, and they have a dilemma. Maybe we can come to a, you know, is this a off the official grid conversation to say, how do we come together? And I think that's a possibility.
I do too. I do too.
Right. And so then we get into the legislative timeline, the potential legislative solutions, right? The status quo versus a, you know, form of commission, you know, and then the payment on an ongoing basis, what each of them do. You know, just again to Megan and to Charlie, I mean, I started in on it, said if they worked on it together, and this is what they came up with. And I think does provide a really, you know, I should actually, I've been seeing this thing since 4 years now. I've been in position. You know, it's really more important to see if this document is what could be helpful to all of you as council members going forward, and how this bill, either of those bills affect us.
So just quickly, Mary, excuse me if I could. So we're not looking to file any new legislation. We're just working on legislation that's already there, correct?
That is correct.
Pretty
Megan, can you go up to the top of, keep going right there. If we can stop.
Okay.
Come right there we go.
Oh, okay.
So the and I'll come to you one second, Yolanda, but the Mass Association of Regional Planning Agencies filed the bills on the left, the current bills, S1682, and that's what we filed. The treasurer's office filed the bills on the right-hand side.
Okay, thank you.
And Mary, you're hoping that like this information would inform the council, and then we're supposed to use that information to, you know, connect with our representatives to, you know, educate them on the process, educate them on these topics, and see if they can make a decision that will positively impact OCPC, right?
That is correct. In the past, Yolanda, what I would do if there was a legislation that would impact us, I would, you know, particularly when I would get it from my fellow regional planning agencies or from the Mass Association of Regional, from Metropolitan Area Planning Council, I just do a group blast out to our legislators and say, hey, I know you guys have heard from us, and can you help us out, right? And that's just not the way how I would like to do it, because it's like, you know, and a lot of us have legislators that cross over borders. So, you know, they may have heard it from somebody else. My goal would be, we should know what our priorities are. We should be ahead of it and be, instead of reacting to it, we should be proactively supporting what's needed for our communities, as well as for OCPC for that matter. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's both. It's not just there's, in this case, this bill could financially adversely affect us, as opposed to some of the bills that we're talking about may be adversely, you know, if we're looking at, call the district local technical assistance program. If that goes away, particularly the smaller communities do not have the capacity to have open space plans, you know, MVP plans, housing production plans, right? All of those master plans, all of that wouldn't happen, right? So back to your question, the idea really is so that we're able to get as much as we can, as reasonably as we can, all the bills that we're aware of, get it before this committee, have you take a look at it, yes or no, or we're not going to take a stance, but we should take a stance, and then because you're a subcommittee of the council, make those recommendations to the council.
That makes sense. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. So this really is the first meeting. There's been no other legislative, this is the first meeting of the legislative committee. It's taken me a little bit of time to get this one off the ground. But again, we'll use the retirement legislation as a catalyst. It just proves even more so that we really need to have this committee up and going. You serve as a tool and guide for which way I would I would either go to go to the legislators, you would go to the legislators, that we're all on the same page.
Mhm.
So timeline, I think, Megan, if we can just go back to the agenda for a quick second. Because I think we were, right, the committee requirements, legislative, right? And we kind of talked about the other legislative priorities. I think it's a twofold. Somewhere in this, I think the next, now I was hoping before the end of June 30th, I think a legislative breakfast with our legislators, I think is important that we do that. You know, we are working on a retreat to have the council members come together. So I think that we could use that time in March to maybe use that meeting to bring these legislative matters. I think rather not having another separate meeting, maybe we use a small portion of that time to vet out the legislative priorities. And then, because I think soon after that is when we're going to meet with legislators. I think that's a must to get in front of them. So I think we have them come with us, and then it's the separate dialogue that you have, whether it's for the town of Kingston or whether it's for the region. But
Yeah, I think, just to interrupt you for a minute, you know, the committee's willing to, you know, break up the work as far as the bills. I think what we'd need, Mary, is a listing of all of the bills, and then the committee can look at it, just so that I'm not doing the same bill Rhonda's doing.
Yeah.
So that, you know, if Rhonda wants to do a particular bill, that's her bill, and then you'll land his bill and Valerie's bill, so that we're splitting it up, so that we're not doing each other's stuff, the same stuff. So that would be, I think, good for us. It'd be a clearer goal to do it that way. Focus.
we will, today's Thursday. We've got a lot of things that we're trying to get out this week, as I'm looking at Megan. If you can give me through the weekend, and
That's fine. That's fine.
by early next week, we'll get the
Sure.
legislation in a document that we'll share with you.
That would be great.
And here's what I would recommend is put your first choice, second choice, and we
Sure.
we'll work around there. Again, we also have someone like Charlie who has a great wealth of information on the transportation bills as well,
Sure.
utilizing his resource too. So,
And I think we can be really productive doing it that way, Mary.
I
Yeah.
can't thank you enough for you, all delegates, and for taking these on. I think that's by you having that engagement, then now you're invested, and it's not just me speaking, it's you as a delegate also speaking. That weight is much more important. It really is. So we'll get that to you early next week. And then we'll try to be as comprehensive as we can, and we'll go from there.
That's great.
So, Mary, I just had a question just on the timeline and the process. So you'll get us a list of the bills. We'll pick which ones we think we'd like to advocate for. And then do we go before the council before we go out and advocate, or?
I think it has to come back to this committee.
Okay.
First. I think we come back to this committee, and then just how I'm seeing the timing, right? Because we're coming to the end of February.
Yeah.
It actually might be in timely if we're still working on getting dates for that retreat. It might be in the same, if we can time it so this committee meets and then the retreat happens, so then we can make a presentation to at the retreat.
Okay.
Go before council.
Okay, and you'll advise us on all of that. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll put together that timeline. It's a good question.
Okay.
In my head, I think I have it, but when you as I'm looking at February 15th, I'm like, what happened to February 1st through the 14th?
No kidding.
There's no time.
No.
But I think, I will not say I think, I know for a fact that's always what ended up happening with me, is that it was important, but when it came down to, getting the financials and some of these other items, it fell to the ground. It just did. So by you as members taking on some items to investigate and explore, it really would help. That's the ambassador piece, right? That's where your value really becomes so important for us to kind of getting this so we can meet those deadlines.
Okay.
So the 15th, we'll get that out early next week, if not sooner. And then by that time we'll have the meeting for the retreat and then get together with our legislators.
Okay.
Good.
Sounds like a good plan.
It sounds like it,
And
doesn't it? Well, thank you all, the two chairs, co-chairs, thank you, as well as Val and Yolanda, as well as Paul and Megan. It does take a village to get this going, but I think again, it's going to be probably really one of the more important pieces that we have to get done.
Right.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
All right.
Have a good afternoon.
you.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Alrighty.
y'all.
Okay.
Have a good
Okay.
day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.